Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Fireside Chat. Is no code the future of all business software? My name is Chris Toranzano, and joining us today is founder CEO of Optum HQ, Simon Chatfield. Simon, thank you for joining us.
Good morning, good afternoon.
Wonderful. So Simon comes to us after spending 15 years building custom applications for Apple, IBM, Intel, AmEx, and a whole slew of other companies. And now spent the past several years building a no-code platform, helping businesses configure their own custom applications on that no-code platform without, as the name suggests, a line of code. Now, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that and seeing just how expansive the no-code platform movement is. But before we do that, I do want to share, if you have any questions during the conversation, please put them in the Q&A module at the bottom of your screen. We will address all of them in the last 15 minutes of the conversation. So once again, Simon, thank you for joining us. I know you had a busy day. I do really appreciate you sitting down for 45 minutes with us. Before we dive into the future, about is no code the future, I'd like to touch upon the past.
Well, if I can say one thing.
Yeah,
so
please.
I think we should talk about the elephant in the room and that our fire is a candle down there.
Honestly, anything larger in Arizona is in fact a hazard. So we wanted to keep it in the fire code. I do appreciate you pointing out our blazing candle. But yeah, to dive kind of right into fire, because it is a fireside chat. Candleside chat next time. But what I'd love to dive into is you went from building custom applications for Apple, IBM, and a lot of other smaller companies like Intel and AmEx. And then you switch over to a no-code platform. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you made that transition, what triggered you to go from the world of code to no-code.
Primarily laziness.
Yeah.
No, I mean, in all seriousness, building software is something I've loved to do forever. So the better part of 25 years, I've been building software. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's just really been kind of a thorn on my side is that people hold software as some type of magic, or magicians can build software. And something that's always just driven me nuts is that software does not need to be difficult.
Right.
And when your entire business is beholden to what the software developers can do, beholden to their timelines, what they're willing to do, or sometimes how they're willing to do it, makes things so much more difficult.
Right.
So really putting that power into the hands of the business and kind of demystifying the whole software development as a thing is something that I'm just extremely passionate about. Making it simple solutions to solve business problems.
Okay, so I mean, to that point, it's almost just a transfer of power, saying because this was such a complex and expert-oriented field for so long, you're saying how can you simplify this process so that really anybody who just knows their business can control their software?
Absolutely. So yeah, in addition to that, it's kind of a transfer of power to the business. They can actually understand how things are put together. They can make modifications themselves. And kind of an ancillary benefit from this. So anybody who's been in technology for the last 5-10 years knows that we've got this huge looming, almost a crisis coming up where we're not going to have enough technical engineers, software developers to build these types of systems. So if we don't start moving things out of this highly technical space, we're not going to have enough people to really do what we need to get done.
Oh, wow.
So it's got to become easier.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I mean, I understood the balance of control and trying to simplify the overall process. So it's really interesting to consider the workforce is actually shrinking. So the skills required to actually build in this old way are becoming less and less.
I've seen reports as recently as 6 months ago saying that within, I think by 2025, there's going to be 1 million software engineering positions that are unfilled, unable to be filled.
And that's where no-code comes in.
And that's another benefit, right?
Right on. So no-code is still, though, right, with all of these kinds of macro and micro forces at play, no-code is still a fairly new market. This concept of people being able to build solutions without a line of code. And a lot of the platforms out there that currently exist are kind of this drag and drop approach. Mm-hmm. And then on the flip side, you have these kind of low-code, no-codes that are really just slightly simpler languages, but still kind of coding languages at play. you didn't, from what I can understand, the platform that you developed doesn't really take either one of those approaches. It's not drag and drop. It's certainly not code. I'd love for you to share a bit about kind of the approach you've taken to still give power over to the business people in controlling their software, but not in this drag and drop fashion.
Sure. Yeah. So there's give and take for everything. So the drag and drop stuff, sure, it's easy to use, but you're dragging and dropping components that were pre-built. So in a real no-code environment, a really business solution, if everything's pre-built, you're really not getting yourself too much further from today's world of having a bunch of siloed or just disparate applications. So, and then the flip side of that are these new, these low-code platforms or no-code solutions that are really just new programming language masquerading as no-code.
Right.
So we kind of took the approach of really leveraging what businesses already understand about the processes, understand about their data, and give them a relatively intuitive interface to build what their data set looks like. So companies understand what their data is. They'll understand what a trip is, or what inventory controls are, and these kinds of stuff, and they'll understand how their business, how their company, how their departments, how their employees work with that data, and where that data comes from and where it's generated.
Right.
So those two pillars is where Optimum is, and the adaptive software platform that Optimum HQ is really kind of boils that down and says you don't really need to concern yourself so much about your users or roles or security, all this kind of stuff built into the platform. You just need to worry about what's your data sets and what's your workflows.
Huh. So, I mean, before the kind of no-code, low-code movement, the only way to speak in this language data sets and workflows was to type in code. And in essence, you've now built a platform that just can speak directly in the language of data sets and workflows.
Correct. Well, yeah. So I would say the language. So if you have enough background in like an Excel spreadsheet, you would kind of understand what data looks like.
Oh wow.
Right?
So, yeah. And actually, let's dive right into that kind of point. So you don't need to know code. To your point, it's not a language. What type of skill sets do you need in order to build a no-code platform? I mean, can anybody do it? Because I'm sure there are still people who wouldn't be comfortable kind of building out a solution on this type of platform. But who is kind of that person who's not the developer necessarily? Because I imagine developers can still build on it. But who's that person who's more in the layman mindset that can build on a no-code platform like yours?
Yeah, I would say anybody who's I guess savvy around data. So people who like business analysts just do amazingly well.
Right.
We actually have what we call solution architects. People understand what data looks like and how processes work. They don't need to worry about lines of code or anything like that, or database connections, or what programming languages am I going to use. They really just got to understand, I've got this data set and I've got like an invoice, for instance. So I've got an invoice, and an invoice has line items.
Right.
So those are two data sets. So if you can kind of understand what the relationship between a line item on an invoice is, then you've got enough kind of a background to understand from the data side. And from the workflow side, it's really about understanding what your steps are. So step one is to gather information from my customer or from a telephone call or whatever it is. Step two is to take that information and put it into this data set, or maybe it's some, adding all the lines together on an invoice would be another step that workflow would do.
Right. That's interesting. Even as you're sharing that, I'm thinking about somebody at my previous company who was a sales engineer who was a wizard when it came to Excel spreadsheets, but in no way was he a developer. And I could see him kind of falling in love with this kind of solution just because he'd love to have that level, kind of that degree of control over the process, but definitely didn't have the coding background to build anything out.
Right.
He just stitched together pivot tables until he got what he needed, which didn't seem like the easiest way to go about doing things.
Right.
It definitely took quite a bit of time, but it's almost, you're saying anybody who's kind of data minded, comfortable with an Excel spreadsheet or with spreadsheets generally and data generally, they can find a way to building out solutions on this type of platform.
Exactly.
Which is kind of outstanding. I mean, so right now, how do people within the businesses that Optimum HQ partners with, do they build it, and then as well as do people within Optimum? Who's building it right now for some of these companies?
It's really a mix of three different groups. So either the business can hand it off to internal resources. So we offer training and online videos and that kind of stuff that lets a business really take it in-house.
Right.
However, oftentimes as they're going through this process of moving off of these other platforms onto Optimum. They're often too really busy to to do that. So they'll either go another of the two routes, which is having Optimum, the staff here, our solution architects, kind of get them started, and then hand that off to them. Or they can use one of our integrators or channel partners, and they can actually sit down with the company or the business and get them started as well.
And the solution architects here, are they developers?
No, they're actually business analysts, just like I mentioned earlier.
Oh, so to your point, again, it's people who just have it savvy with data, never actually went through a coding boot camp and just they're comfortable with the conversation.
Yeah, we eat our own dog food here. So if we couldn't do it in the same way we expect our customers to do, then
that seems like a fair way to go about doing things.
I'm sorry, drink our own champagne, not a your own.
Is that the more elegant way?
Yes,
yeah. I guess dog food is not as appealing. But yeah, thinking about all of this to address actually the question that is the title of this fireside chat, right? So you transferred over because you recognized that software needed to be made simpler, both for two reasons. One, you wanted to take control out of the hands of necessarily just people who are savvy in IT, and it's not about taking control from them. It's really about giving control to people who don't have a coding background,
right?
But who know their business, who can probably map out their process on a piece of paper. You want to give control over to them, and there's a dwindling workforce, or at least a decreasing workforce, who can even meet the skills necessary to build in the older fashion.
Well, I think the workforce is increasing, just the demand is outpacing.
Oh, interesting. Oh, that's a different way to look at it. And to your point, you don't need to know code to build on the software. So the question that becomes is kind of what are the limits? If it almost sounds too good to be true. This idea that you can build any solution on a no-code platform. So you're going, is this the future of all business software? Is every business you see in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, businesses are going to go, I'm a $5 million company. I'm going to now start the process of porting everything onto this one no-code platform that's going to do everything I need to, and exactly how I need to do it. So yeah, I guess that's
so. I would say absolutely, unequivocally, no code is the future, and really because anybody who's been in business for any length of time, or even taken any kind of business courses or entrepreneurial courses, especially, knows that you need to understand what is your unique selling proposition. What makes you unique in the market? How do you differentiate? So if all you're doing is using the exact same software that your competitors are using, then how are you differentiating? And how they've been doing in the past is like, well, we don't use that entirely. We also use this other software over here to do this, and we use this other software over here to do this.
Right.
And before long, they've got 3 dozen different pieces of software, and they are unique, but their processes to manage their business across 3 dozen different software applications is just a nightmare. You get to the point where it's just not maintainable anymore. And unfortunately, that is the status quo. That's how business is done in the old world. Right. The new world is that if I should say there are some companies that as they get larger, they understand the power of what a custom implementation can do, what custom software can do for them.
Right.
But they still realize that now I've got this custom software that is exactly what I need today,
right?
Or exactly what I needed to do yesterday. Now I need to do something that I didn't anticipate, and I can invest entirely in my custom software on day one,
right?
Or day 31 or whatever, or I can go pull on another piece of software off the shelf. And by and large, that's the easiest thing to do. And then they find this custom software that they've had gets older and older and less useful,
right?
But still critical. And they've got all these ancillary applications sitting around and saying, oh, did you remember to put that into our old custom software? And they've got some process around it. And that kind of cycle repeats itself. They say, we need to make custom software again.
Oof.
So again, so that's effectively been the status quo for decades.
Right.
But now the ability for a company to quickly and efficiently build a custom solution that embodies their unique method of service or their unique product or process without having to go back and invest months and months of time in developers, and software engineers, and maintenance and all that kind of stuff. They can actually do it very quickly, readily, and be adaptive to whatever their changing business needs are. There's no doubt that more and more companies are going to go in that way.
That's so interesting, because the way in which, right, as you're sharing that information, right, it sounds like every business flat out would of course benefit. Actually, let me ask that question. Would every business benefit from a solution that is custom to their processes?
So the easy answer, and the answer is definitely yes. However, I would say that there are some companies that might not be ready for it. And kind of what I'm thinking of are companies that don't really know what their processes are yet. Okay. So if you don't really know what your processes are, maybe you're really just starting out, and I mean, if you don't mind tinkering and jumping into a platform and just start building it, you certainly can. But oftentimes, if you don't know enough to know what you don't know, why don't I spend $12 and learn something about what I need here for this application, or $20 over here kind of thing, while you figure out how you're going to put your business together.
That's interesting. So to that point, right? So we're saying that the future is no code, because it is a much more affordable and quicker way to implement solutions that are aligned to your exact needs. However, there is still a part that kind of precedes the moment when you should necessarily implement it. And that's before you know how you're running your business. If you don't know your operations, what are you automating, integrating, streamlining, managing? What are you defining and trying to put into software terms? So today, I guess the question would be, so, when does it still make sense to have a box software solution? You maybe just touch upon that. I just want to kind of
I would say that's what it is. It's if it's not mission critical to your business.
Yeah.
So let's say that there's a new. Trying to find a real type example. Let's say we're doing maybe it's our QuickBooks, our financial package or something.
Right.
And we don't have a bookkeeper and accountant on staff, and we don't want to take the time to determine, what are my processes around this. So if I can buy a piece of software that kind of gives me the guide rails to keep me safe, because it's not core to my business, then I would say go down that path. Until you get to a point where it's like, okay, and understand the limitations of that software, understand what it's doing for me, and now I'm ready to kind of make it my own and build that in Optimum. But I would say that's probably the most important thing. So the thing that's not necessarily critical to your business, but it's important, and it's commodity, and you don't mind somebody telling you how you're supposed to do it, then go for it. I would say buy the off-the-shelf software or that SaaS product, and go from there.
It's not critical, and if you don't mind somebody else telling you how to do it.
Right. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
There's nothing wrong to say, hey, this is not core to my business. I don't need to have a unique solution. I just need something that works. I don't want to have to think about it.
That's I suppose the big one too, is you don't actually have to think about how the process is laid out. And kind of what you do. I imagine there are people who think it's all ends about how that exact software needs to be done. So you're going to go, right, to your point, I don't have an accountant on staff. Tell me what software do I need, what functionality do I need,
right.
How do I make this as simple as possible? It's like me using TurboTax to do my taxes. I'm like, things aren't complicated. It's not.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, that's when you would opt not to do that.
So box software, you're saying, still has a place in the software landscape, right? So in terms of what you just described,
Sure, absolutely.
You're okay with the company telling you this is how it needs to get done. It's not part of your critical offering or critical processes. But what about traditional custom software? So from scratch code, does that still have, I'm a business, I know I need a custom solution. It is a critical part of my business. I want to design it. Does it make sense to still go with custom software, like traditional custom software?
If it's business operational software, I can't imagine. I don't see a path I would ever go down again to go to custom software. I would build everything with a no-code solution, for sure. If I was a company building a device, like a hardware device, does no code make the most sense for that? Probably not.
Yeah.
But for the operational side of it, the data management side of it, absolutely, I do that side of it.
Interesting. So could you actually draw that out just a little bit? So to your point, the operational ends of the business, how I run my organization, how data flows through it, how I manage my team, how I service my clients potentially. No code should be the likely or the prevailing option, arguably all the time. I know extremes are so dangerous to proclaim, especially in advance. But Essentially all of the time, but so at least most of the time. And then if you're building literally your own solution, you're not saying use no code to build your necessarily your product that you're going to sell.
Well, we actually have channel partners who are doing just that. They're actually building products on and with Optimum. So I can't say that's always the case,
right?
But in cases where if you're building hardware components or you're building buildings and that kind of stuff, right? You know, obviously, you're not going to use no code to do that. Right. Yeah, obviously, I'm a bias. I'm coming from a bias perspective.
Yeah.
But I don't see a reason to if you're going to build custom software for your business for business management, I would 100% of the time go no code.
Okay. Okay. So even now that we're kind of in the comparative discussion between box and custom and no code, I think it's probably worthwhile to dive into, because this was one of the sub questions we received from the audience about cost, just the concept of subscription cost with no code, and how solutions are built on the platform. How should someone be, somebody who's in the business and IT purchasing role be thinking about cost when it comes to no code platforms?
It's usually around efficiency. So. We offer a pretty low cost per seat or per employee for a business. And I like to think of it, for effectively what would be, a couple of hours of the burden of the employee's burden hourly rate per month is what the cost of a no code seat or no code license is, where they could take care of, 40-50% efficiencies. We have one company that had 30% efficiency increase across, which affected what was it, 230,000 man hours or person hours per year, and at a cost that just completely infinitesimal saving. I mean, it's just amazing how much money they saved for what amount to a couple hours of that employee's time.
That's extreme.
They actually saved 30 hours a month. So, I mean, it's amazing what you can do. So think of it from that perspective, not necessarily as an additional software cost, but actually what else can you do with that employee's time?
That's interesting.
And so because not only are you saving the time for actually doing the task, but you're with automation, correcting data, you don't need to worry about copying spreadsheets between, or manual entry issues, or duplication of entry. Like I said, these companies have dozens of different software applications that their employees are managing the data flow between, either through spreadsheets or something. It's ridiculous. It's crazy.
So to that point, actually, the being aware, that was a time consideration, and obviously it ends up being a large cost consideration as well. Once they implemented it, they recognized that they'd saved $5 million. So right now, we are aware that no-code, low-code is still a nascent market. So a market that's still budding and coming into its own. It's still in that early adopter phase where people, and going to the early majority phase, where people are really starting to see the power of it because they don't have to be the first one to try it anymore. Right. The person next to them has tried it, seen successful, then go. But right now, who are you seeing using it? Who are the people that are being triggered to actually dive into it? And is it always a time thing and an operational efficiency thing? Is that how businesses should be looking at themselves going, is this wasting time, or how else can they self-identify that this is worth exploring?
The big thing is I would say the strongest customers we have or people entering are the people who are about to make that jump into custom software, or they're about to do some other large change in the organization. They're going to write something custom code, or they're going to move off this old ERP system to this new ERP system, and they're about to sink hundreds of thousands of dollars into that type of effort. So the companies that are having enough pain and they realize that they need to make a change are easily the ones who should be first and foremost taking no code as an option. If you're sitting in your business today and things are running smoothly, you're not dealing with growth or employee issues because they can't stand working with your current systems, maybe it might make sense to remain the status quo. But if you're a company that is considering either going down a custom software route, or you just don't want to add one more application to the software stack, It's like, what else can we do?
Right.
So if you're in that kind of mode, I would say take a look at one of the no-code platforms out there.
Gotcha. So what you've experienced to date, a lot of it is people who are already kind of in that in the process of looking potentially at custom solutions or at ERP, like large scale change to their software systems.
Yeah, my approach has always been and remains today at the company and everywhere else is that we do not want to be a solution looking for a problem, right?
Yeah.
We want to be the solution for people who have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's the right thing for that company, then it's the right thing for the company. If it's the wrong thing, it's like, you know what? You love that application, keep it,
yeah.
right? Or maybe this isn't the right move for you at this point.
Right.
Eventually, I'm sure it will be because you're going to be looking at those kind of changes.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we definitely don't want to force. This isn't change next year. You'll be left in the dust.
Right.
I mean, unless your competitors do, and then maybe you will be.
Well, to your point, it's a game of priorities. Everybody's going, is this push the top of my list? And it's often most evident in people who are already kind of seeking out a solution.
Exactly. It's got to be the right business decision.
Right. Yeah. That's really nice. So one of the other questions that we had come in was about what would you say to someone who has experienced kind of the early generation low code, no code solutions that were anything but low code or no code?
Yeah, I can imagine which platforms that this individual's talking about. Yeah, we're trying not to. Yeah. So they either they went with one of those companies that are really masquerading as a low code, but really they're just as complicated as anything else. You have to buy their hardware, you have to install their software packages everywhere, and instead of writing if you drag a line across or something like that. So those ones were unfortunately they had the right idea, the right marketing message, but the implementation just way too difficult. In which you had to hire specialists to build it for you. Or the flip side of that, as we talked about earlier, it's like, this is really great, and I can put this neat thing together, but I can't really use it because I need to be able to do this, and this, and it doesn't do that. Right? So there's some degree of limitation. So yeah, I guess so that person right now has been burned a little bit. Skepticism, I guess. Would you say the only approach is really just further investigation before purchasing? Like how? Because I imagine there's a lot of people out there right now, right, that are trying to play this no-code, low-code game, and they're balancing in that language, trying to say they're number one or the best. Do you recommend a degree of skepticism at this stage in the market when they approach a business, or do you think? Honestly, I love the skeptics. Yeah. Whenever we're talking to a potential customer saying, their initial reaction is, there's no way you can do this. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And probably the best thing that the best feeling is, you turn around a few hours later, like literally a few hours later, say you mean something like this, and they see it and they're like, oh my gosh. Yeah. So, I mean, the skeptics are the greatest thing. It's the largest revelation. Yeah, I think healthy skepticism is a fantastic thing. There's too many snake oil salesmen out there. So saying, prove it. Yeah, any company should be able to prove it. Right. To some degree. True. Even in or during a demo, show me how that would work, or show me how you've solved a problem similar to this. Yeah. Previously. So I think that's healthy. I think it's good. Yeah. And if you're hesitant to take a jump, do something that's not a huge commitment. Say, okay, just solve this one thing. Just do this one thing. Yeah. Right. And if you can do this one thing, maybe I'll start to believe. Right. Yeah. That's right on. I mean, I feel like that's a very a fairly exceptional thing to do as a business, is to invite skepticism and to say, please, make sure you ask how. Yeah, exactly. We love to prove it. So that's it's coming up on the 30 minutes. So instead of engaging in another conversation, I'll dive to a question. Please open to Q&A. Okay. I'd love to kind of grab some of the questions that we have seen come through. One of them right here is, how do you address the worry that businesses or business owners might have? Excuse me, let me read this to myself first. I'll deal with that dance. I don't really tap dance, sorry.
Oh, it's interesting. How do you address the worry that business owners might have in not owning their homegrown software if the time ever comes to sell the business? So they go to sell their business and they don't actually own their software. They've been like licensing it.
So always be aware of who owns your data and who owns your systems. So the way we address that is that the ownership of the data is always 100% owned by the customer, as well as the ownership of the workflows. Anything they built in the system is also owned by that customer. So, oftentimes it's almost seen as a liability, because if you own your own software, you have software maintenance costs. So if you have software maintenance costs and saying, oh, you've got this, so what platforms are written on? Do you need to have COBOL programmers? Hopefully it's not that old. You have to have COBOL programmers, a Java, or is it .NET?
Yeah.
Who do we need to own? Who do we need to have in-house that supports this? Or what software contracts we need to have for somebody to support the software? So there's significant expense in maintaining that type of software.
Right.
But there's definitely a certain value in having your IP, right? So having ownership of your solution is important. So a solution like Optimum, you actually own your data, you own your workflows. Nobody can take that from you, right?
Yeah.
You can export it as well whenever you want. We have APIs that go in and out of it, so you can export it immediately. So re-platforming does not need to be a huge thing. But most importantly, you understand what the data looks like. You understand what the system was doing.
Yeah.
And you still own it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So to your point, it's both, what you just spoke to, right, was the decrease in IT maintenance costs associated with not having to own your own software, and you do in fact still own all your data and your workflows, and you can export it really at any time. There is that sense of ownership as a business. If I would sell it, I can sell it with.
Exactly. Not to mention, if you're owning your own software, you also need to worry about where's it running. Is it running on a desktop? Is it running on a server? Do we maybe have that in AWS, or are we hosting it on our? So there's a whole slew of additional things you need to consider yourself if you built the software on the software from soup to nuts.
All right. So the next one, actually, I saw one that had to do with this idea. Okay, we have a question about pricing. So when looking at the pricing of the platform on the website, what is the difference between enterprise and standard? And why would I want an enterprise license?
Okay. So what enterprise level does for you, and if you, and I would probably say if you have to ask, go with standard. So really what enterprise is going to do for you is going to give you complete 100% data isolation. So it's primarily for companies that have either significant amounts of data, so they're going to store just a ton of data within the system, because there are usage limits per user. You get only so many rows of data. So if you know you're going to be storing, billions of rows of records of data, you can just go with the enterprise route and not need to worry about that side of it. However, but you also get data isolation for like HIPAA compliance or higher level of logical and physical data isolation for the enterprise. If you're not in either of those two categories, I would say just go with the standard.
So a lot of data, or if you need isolation.
Correct.
Enterprise.
Yep.
Gotcha. That is clean cut. That is clean cut. So one of the ones I saw was about a platform, which actually I think connects to really the first question, which is, this is not, you don't internally host this. This is still a SaaS platform.
Correct.
So how do you kind of just share just a bit about that? The fact that you're kind of creating these custom solutions, but it's on a SaaS platform. What does that look like for the business in terms of actually managing those types of solutions? Does that make sense? Really, just like they speak. It seems like they're asking about the benefit of like a platform.
Okay. Yeah.
As opposed to like them, like why wouldn't they just kind of build it internally?
The big benefits of the platform. So, we came from building solutions for some of the biggest companies in the world. So we're having that kind of understanding from what potential necessities as far as users, as far as security, as far as roles and security, data management, backups, all these kinds of things on the platform is all taken care of.
Right.
So if you say in our company we have, we'll say 6 departments. So each department can have different roles. That'll give them different access levels in the system. And of course, the user accounts and security levels, not only what, maybe there's different views on the same data, or different workflows can be run by different departments. So you don't even really need to worry about any of that kind of security level stuff, or the backups, or any of that kind of stuff to utilize the platform. Or the APIs, that's basically stuff you get for free on the platform, as well as your UI. There's so many benefits from stuff that, from a business side, it's like, do I really care that much? Do I really care that much if it's hosted here, here, or here, or whether whether this is blue or green, or this button's over here versus over here, kind of things? And sometimes the answer is yes, but most of the time in the business operational environments, like, we just want it to work.
Yeah.
I want it to be secure, and I want to be able to have control of it.
Right.
So if I can tick all those boxes, and it does, most importantly, it does what we need it to. If I can tick those boxes, then why do I want to worry about everything else? Right?
Yeah.
Like you get it free with the platform.
Interesting. So there's one that touches upon what seems like they're asking about an example. And by that I mean, they say, can you share a recent experience going from a business process to a software solution? So I guess, what does that look like in the mind of the creator? What does it look like to go from someone saying, hey, listen, I'm trying to get this done, to now it's the software is actually this thing that can work on this platform?
Sure, I'll give you a few different examples. So one, we were working with a manufacturing company, and they were having an issue managing red line inventory levels. So how much stock do they need to have on the shelf, and how much do they need to have throughout the entire manufacturing process? So this is something that was taking them 1 to 2 weeks every quarter to figure out.
Right.
So we took that down, and after sitting down with them for a few minutes, we probably sat down for half an hour, and they outlined what one of their biggest pain points, which was this. And literally within 5 hours, we turned around and said, okay, here's your solution, all working in a single platform.
Right.
So it's really just saying, what problem do you want to solve?
Say 5 hours, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
5 hours for a second.
5 hours, which, it's what 1/20th the time they were spending every quarter is how quickly we put that solution together. The other thing is really just daring to ask a question, like, is there a better way to do this? So we had one customer we were talking with, where they had their boss would go on these meetings and then would call and dictate something back to somebody at the home office, and they would try and write it into meeting notes and whatnot. And they would try and make sure it's there for him before he goes to the follow-up meeting. And this was this huge process. And I said, you know what? Why don't you just have him dial a phone number when he's done? He can leave a message that can automatically get attached to the customer, and then we can text them with that message 15 minutes before the next meeting time. And then I think their response was, "Oh my gosh, you can do that?" It's like, well, yeah, because Optimum's a workflow system. It can answer phones, it can make email, it can basically do all that kind of stuff. It's just like, just dare to think about what could be possible if you could build it yourself, which you can.
Interesting. So even touching upon that one point just then, it seems like there are these two personas that are currently being drawn to no code, and it's those who are currently suffering under the hands of their software, or those who are the ones who ask, is there a better way?
Right.
Interesting. So
one other thing I said, there's one other example we had as well, and this is more of a personal, I shouldn't say personal, but this one, we had our solutions architects kind of meeting with this particular customer, and they were building an ERP implementation, which is a large enterprise level system that runs everything from financials to orders to, I think they did manufacturing and whatnot. And one of the feedback things they had after the hour-long meeting where solution architects were walking through their business is like, it's been a breath of fresh air, because you guys were really asking what our processes are and trying to understand how stuff works, as opposed to how can I make your company fit into my software. So it's a completely different type of conversation. It's a conversation, what do you need your software to do, versus how can I make you look as much like my product as possible.
Right. Right.
And that's been the status quo, and that's what needs to change.
I almost want to end on that message if I could, but there is one more question. So it has to do with this notion that, if they do want to do a portion of their business better, or at least, there's let's say 80% of it, 90% of it, like, I think we're running okay in those areas right now. If you replace 10% of what I do, how easily can you integrate kind of the rest of what we do?
Sure. So yeah, Optimum is a platform where you can build as much or as little as you'd like.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, the majority of our customers start with just doing that 10% case, and we'll through Optimum's APIs, because we have both inbound and outbound API capability.
Mm-hmm.
So API is application programming interface.
Right.
It lets us communicate with other systems. So other systems can communicate to us, and we can communicate out. So oftentimes we'll go in and we'll say, hey, yeah, let's just solve this one thing. If you like that piece of software, we don't need to touch it. This is not an all or nothing aspect at all. However, I would say most of the companies, once they see how quickly and how easily it is to build that 10%, they say, well, what if we just did this other thing over here? Yeah. And you mean can I have this answer my emails too? And that's what I need to worry about copying stuff in my CRM or something like that. It's like, well, yeah, we'll just add that in, and a few hours later, that's there. So we see companies start leveraging more things once they understand what's possible. But if there's stuff you like, keep it. Right? If it's working for you, let it work.
Right on. And even to address the kind of question about skepticism earlier on in the conversation, do you think that is already one of the best ways to approach no code is start with that kind of 10%. Look for the 10% that are like, this thing's either a mess or I can do this better. Start there, get a feel for it, get comfortable with it, and then start to kind of seek out solutions or problems really, unless you're.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back to my initial things, like keeping things as simple as possible. Yeah. Right. If you want to be successful, no matter what it is you're doing, if you can find the most simple solution, easiest solution, your chances of success skyrocket.
Yeah, there's a line, right? The complexity is the death of profitable growth. All right, that's everything, Simon. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, all of you, for joining us for the 45 minutes. As I noted, we will share the recording with all of the registrants and all, of course, the attendees today. Hope to see you next time. Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right.
Cool.